Hi guys! I recently asked you on Instagram if you were interested in knowing about the materials that I use to create my illustrations. The majority of you said yes, so that's why I decided to record this video. Let's jump right in and start with the paper. I have lots and lots of paper, but here are a few of my notebooks. So the small one I recently got as a gift. It's very handy because you can just pop it in your bag when you want to sketch outside or when you're somewhere and you have inspiration. Then you have this A4 sized sketchbook. These are the ones that I use the most. And the paper is heavy, so it's very thick. Yeah, it's just my favorite paper to draw on and to paint on. It's a little grainy, it has structure, and I always prefer this than smooth paper. Another A4 sketchbook from Søstrene Grene. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a Danish brand and they have a store here in Amsterdam. I really love it. Oh my god, it's one of my favorite stores. And so my mother-in-law, she got me this as a gift. As an illustrator, people always get you nice sketchbooks and I'm happy with it. This paper is very thin. So it's usually not my first choice, but sometimes it's nice when you get it as a gift because it kind of pushes you to go out of your comfort zone and use different kind of materials. So this is one that I recently got for myself and it feels very fancy. It has this linen cover. I got this one because I wanted to start journaling. And I was inspired by Rebecca Green, the illustrator, who wrote a blog post about it. The inside has very thick pages. I'll just flip a little bit through this. It's not super interesting. These are just doodles from my day-to-day activities and thoughts. I just started, so like the entire notebook is almost empty. This is my biggest sketchbook. And like for instance the illustrations that I make for clients, for my Instagram and for my website, I like to draw them as big as possible. I guess I like the space to make mistakes, to play around with proportions and really zoom in on the details, I guess. The only problem with this one is that the paper is very smooth and it's really not good to use watercolor or gouache paint, any kind of paint actually. I usually use paint. As you can see, the paper was starting to deform and it also dripped through the other side of the paper. Moving on to the mediums and supplies that I use to make my illustrations. I always start off with a sketch made with pencil and I prefer H5 or H6 because it doesn't smudge or stain. I always use paint afterwards, so for me it's just to get a rough sketch of the shapes and everything. That's how I start drawing. For my paint I have a lot of brushes, but I have like 3 or 4 favorites. I don't know about you guys if it's the same, but I always tend to grab those ones. One of my ultimate favorite brushes is this one. It is very soft and it is kind of round and a little bit flat. It's just perfect to use for watercolor paint. Real hair holds on to the paint a little bit better, but I do use synthetic brushes as well. I think this one is real hair though. It's the one that I really use the most. Normally you would use this to make some narrow lines, some really fine lines. It's just my go-to brush. And then this one is a little longer. It has longer hairs. It's narrow and pointy, but very soft as well. I use it for both watercolor and ink. I like this one because it's super flat and it's very square. You can make nice sharp lines with this one. Okay, my most used and most important materials are watercolor paints. And here we have 3 palettes that I've been using for a very long time. As you can see, it's very messy and half empty. And that's okay because you can always buy some new refills, which are the little squares. You can just pull them out, and when they're empty, throw them away and get some new ones. I really need to get some new ones. But I just mix them with each other. I mix them with gouache paint as well. From your left to the right, the brands of these palettes are Winsor, Newton, Schmincke and Van Gogh. Just sharing it with you guys in case you wanted to know. I don't remember the prices. I do remember that there was one which was a lot more expensive and then 2 cheaper ones, I think. But I truly believe that even with the cheapest paint palette or tools, you can create the most wonderful artwork. So if you have a small budget, don't worry. Just get anything that's within your budget, and I'm sure it can get the job done, as I have many times. Right, so here on this little test paper, I wanted to show you all the differences between the materials that I use. So we're gonna start out with the watercolors. Just a quick little note, I did not go to art school, so I use the materials the way I feel like using them, and it may not be the right way or the way that maybe some of you learned it at school, but for me it's all about enjoying what you do and of course the end results as well. So I'm just gonna share with you guys the way I do it, and maybe it's useful or insightful for some of you. So I usually don't like to wet my paper first and add the paint later. I prefer to mix it straight away into the palette. So I just drip a little bit of water on the color that I want to use. The amount of water depends on how much coverage I want. If you want a really transparent effect, then you use a lot of water. If you want a solid color with a lot of coverage, then you use less water. Okay, so moving on from our test paper to the sketch that I just made using the pencils, I thought it would be a good idea to show you within this illustration each different material, just so you can see the difference. So I'm starting with this blue watercolor paint for her overalls. And I usually don't really plan ahead what kind of palette I'm gonna use. I just go with the flow. Like lately I have been trying to stick to some colors, but usually I just think on the spot what I'm gonna do and just go with the flow. Okay, so in this little jar I keep most of my gouache paints. I don't really have a lot of them. I just mix them with my watercolors as well. And so I'm just gonna open up and show you guys. Okay, wait, so these are actually not all gouache paints. I can see that we have some watercolor in tube form and some acrylics as well. So I'm just gonna put the other ones to the side for a minute. I'd like to focus on the gouache paint for now. At the time, this is definitely my favorite kind of paint to use. I love it to paint backgrounds. I create plants, flowers, grass, and clothing, hair. But I mix it up with watercolor so often that honestly, sometimes I don't even remember what I used. So here we go again with the little lady that we are creating. I just showed you how I made her overalls using watercolor paint, and now I'm gonna show you with this brown orangey gouache the way I make the base for a hair color. The texture is very thick and creamy. I really like to use this because the color comes out in such a great way. Right, so on to the pencils. A couple of years back, I got this box with quite expensive pencils, with like 250 colors or something, and I never used them. Until recently, when I discovered that using colored pencils was actually pretty cool and different, so I'm still experimenting and trying out, but I do like the effect that it gives and the texture that it gives to your illustration. So here I just wanted to demonstrate on 3 different kind of paper what this pencil would look like. These pencils are from Caran-d'Ache, but again, it could be any kind of pencil. Just go to your local art supply store, test it out on a little piece of paper, and if you like what you see, then you're good to go. I like to use pencil to add a little blush to my characters' faces. Okay, now we're diving into the markers. These markers are from Copic, and I think that a lot of illustrators and graphic designers know these very well. I studied media management, which evolved around graphic design, amongst other things. And so in the first year, we were told to purchase these markers. Again, after I graduated, I never touched these again. They were like gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. I was mainly using watercolor paint. And then I was missing like something a little bit more graphic and sharper. What I really love about these markers is that they have 2 sides, one for fine lines and the other one is for bold and chunky lines. You can get those little refill bottles of ink, but somehow I always mess it up when I try to refill, so I prefer getting complete new ones. So back to our illustrated young lady. I'm using a pink Copic marker to color in her shirt. And again, normally I won't use all my materials and tools necessarily within the same artwork, but I thought this would be a fun and easy way to show you the different possibilities. I also love using these markers for shadows and details, or just a little pop of color. I think it's also quite useful to draw some patterns on clothing. Here I'm just doing a little stripe for the shirt. This is actually one of my favorite patterns, in real life as well as in illustration. I'm such a geek for details, and this is actually my favorite part of the artwork to do. I'm curious if any of you are the same. If you feel me, let me know in the comments. Time for ink. I really like these little black bottles. It reminds me of my Bobbi Brown foundation. Has nothing to do with this video, but it comes in the same like little dropper bottles. You just open them and squeeze a couple of drops in a tray. You can do so many things using ink. Sometimes I make like an entire illustration only using this. You could take out your narrow and sharp brush for fine lines and hairs and eyelashes. Or you can take your fluffy brush, add a lot of water and make it more transparent for backgrounds or structure. I use it for line work and to finalize my illustrations. Creating hair strokes with ink is so relaxing and soothing. The last supplies that I want to share with you guys are a couple of fine liners and another Copic marker. I use these fine liners for the smallest details, where even my tiniest brush with ink is too large. And I recently got this other Copic marker. It has a different tip and I find it very nice for lettering. You can use it for coloring or details as well. That's about it. It was quite a long video. I actually almost showed all the materials that I use except acrylics. I don't use it often, but I could do a separate video on this maybe in the future. I hope you enjoyed it and it was useful to some of you. Thank you so much for watching and have a beautiful and creative day. See you next time.